The U.S. and India have hailed a new era in the country's relationship. U.S. President Joe Biden is hosting Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi for his first full state visit to the United States. The two leaders say that their partnership will define the next century, with Washington viewing Delhi as a counterweight to China. But there's also been opposition to Modi's trip over what critics call the repression of journalists and religious minorities in India.
The message was clear. It was a visit among friends. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi was greeted with applause as he made his way through Congress to formally address lawmakers for the second time as Indian leader.
A lot has changed since I came here 7 summers ago. But a lot has remained the same, like our commitment to deepen the friendship between India and the United States.
Washington rolled out the red carpet for Mr. Modi in an attempt to infuse relations with fresh energy. A delegation of high-ranking US politicians attended the welcome ceremony, including Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. The US hopes to turn a new page in its relations with India that became strained following Modi's decision to remain neutral on the war in Ukraine. The US sees India as an important counterbalance to China's growing influence. A role India, however, has been cautious to adopt.
Welcome back to the White House.
In a joint press conference, the two leaders were careful not to mention any points of friction. Instead, they announced greater defense cooperation and focused on their close ties.
A partnership that is among the most consequential in the world, that is stronger, closer, and more dynamic than any time in history.
The visit culminated in a lavish state dinner, and for the first time with a menu that was entirely plant-based. This in honor of Mr. Modi, who is a strict vegetarian.
This man right here.
So let's get more now from DW Chief International Editor Richard Walker, who joins us here in the studio. I mean, quite the pomp and circumstance, we have to say. Tell us about the tensions that we weren't seeing.
Yeah, that's true. So, I mean, it really was a remarkable welcome that Modi got, and the second speech to Congress as well. But it's also true that a small number of Democratic lawmakers boycotted that speech over what they see as the kind of squeeze on press freedoms that's been taking place in India. And you've seen India sort of falling precipitously through the international press freedom rankings, you know, that come out every year. This sense of a hostile environment to the very substantial Muslim minority that exists in India, that people link to Modi's Hindu nationalist agenda, something that has been criticised. Some of the measures that have come out from Modi's government in the past have been criticised even by the United Nations as fundamentally discriminatory. But Modi, in his speech to Congress, managed to kind of transcend this and really kind of exude this sense of sort of common purpose of the two great democracies kind of coming together and sort of batting away and, you know, only glancingly referring to Ukraine and obviously the fact that, you know, India has been walking this very sort of neutral line on the Ukraine war, busily buying very large amounts of Russian oil at low cost, almost like benefiting from the situation there, managing to sort of transcend that and present himself as an emblem of common purpose of two great democracies in the world.
Well, because India is of quite strategic importance to the United States, isn't it? And the grand hope is that India could be this counterweight now to China. What do you make of that hope? Does it seem realistic?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is kind of key to the reception that he's getting here, because, you know, the United States is increasingly massively focused on the threat of China as the threat to American preeminence, not just in Asia, but also in the world. And here they see a man who can sort of stand by them, you know, the leader of the largest democracy in the world that's right there in Asia. And to an extent, India can play that role, but there are limits. Let's talk about the Indian Ocean, that, of course, India sits in the middle of. We often talk about the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait as the real kind of battleground between the US and China. But the Indian Ocean is incredibly important as well. This is the route through which China gets, its energy from the Middle East. So China has been building up a network of bases, naval and seaport bases, that it is gradually kind of, obviously moving into the Indian Ocean as a place that it wants to have a very large presence. Without India there to push back, then China could potentially dominate. So that's really important. But I think the limits are, if you look at the sort of worst-case scenarios that we think about in Asia, a potential war over Taiwan, for example, would India fight with the United States over a war over Taiwan? That's seen as pretty unlikely. Japan probably would. Australia might well. Those are both treaty allies of the United States and also much closer to Taiwan. India much less likely to get drawn into any actual sort of war with China unless its border with China itself, which is the world's largest contested bit of territory, land territory, unless that exploded. So those are the kinds of limits. The Americans realise India's not going to be an ally, but it wants to be as close a friend as it can possibly make it.
Really interesting. Thank you so much for putting this into the geopolitical context for us. DW Chief International Editor Richard Walker, we appreciate it.